for some reason, I couldn't shut it up. In my head, I would think, why would Hashem put those questions in my mind? I thought, I'm right, they're wrong, so clearly the system is off. My father actually says that I didn't leave. My father says you were pushed out. In the end, I had a rabbi tell me, it's a shame you weren't born a boy, because as a woman, it's not necessary. When we got married, my sisters were really embarrassed because by the mitzvahs, we were smiling at each other, and none of us were looking down and davening. Looked like we were in love. Our get story is also like insane. The two of us were crying and they said, are you sure you want to end this? And we said, yeah. And then as they went and wrote up, the two of us were kissing, and they saw.
This is Melissa Weisz. She grew up Hasidic in Boro Park, Brooklyn. She spoke Yiddish, wore the garb, lived with the traditions, and then later left. Years ago, when I left Hasidic Kiryas Joel, Melissa and I briefly crossed paths. She had already left for a while, but I never heard her story until now. When I invited her onto my podcast for a live presentation where she tells her story and takes questions, she told me something important. Her story isn't really about leaving. It's about living with many pieces and the process of putting them together. In fact, she surprised me by saying that she describes herself as Hasidic, although she said with a caveat her sisters wouldn't necessarily agree. Melissa is also a writer, actor, and producer, often portraying Hasidic women, a role she's grown into with a strong sense of responsibility. Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing? My name is Frida Weisel. I am a Jewish YouTuber and content creator. I do a series of interviews with people I find interesting. And this time I am so grateful to have with me Melissa Weisz. Is it okay that I call you Melissa?
Yeah, it's great. I go by Melissa or Malki. Both are fine.
So I think it would make sense to start by just like hearing about where you come from. Is that okay?
For sure.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Boro Park. I have 6 sisters and 2 brothers, so a lot of people. And then my sisters got married and my mother had more babies. So I was also an aunt, just surrounded by a lot of kids and family, changing diapers at a very young age and babysitting. And yeah, like a pretty generic for Boro Park upbringing. And I loved it.
What number are you, did you say?
I'm the middle. I'm the middle of 9.
What was your childhood, like your early childhood like? What are your primary memories of who were you close to as a child? Who were people that were important to you?
I had a neighbor that was really close with who was Chabad. And that was my way of being like, I had access to like books from the library. There was things that my neighbor had that I didn't have at home. That was really helpful when I was like a little older, like a teenager. And it made me also, there was like people outside of just the school I was from. I felt very safe and very like understood.
By this Chabad neighbor?
Yeah, because they had become from, the parents had become from. My mother was a real like balabusta. Everything is always clean. And and this family didn't seem to care about all those things. They just they sat with their families and they had family meetings. Like all these things that were just, in my brain, very different. And like they expressed their feelings in this really big way. The father, I remember once, got upset and said very loudly, but not scary, I am upset. I'm going to my room and we will talk about this later. And I was like, my family, it was very like, not culturally.
Were you Hungarian?
Yeah. My mother's mother was born in America, actually. But my mother's father and my father's parents, both, Hungarian. So I just remember that being like a very different culture and looking at it as like, oh, she doesn't care if the walls are clean, if the kids are like dirty. She just is very much about their feelings. So that was a unique kind of perspective that I had seeing their life. And so I was there a lot. But childhood, I would babysit a lot of my sisters. So my sisters were a big part of my life. My grandparents. My family also invited a bunch of people to like meals. And when I was younger, we had this guy that might work for my dad. His name was Lance. And he was a black guy. And he would take us out when my father couldn't. And it was Chalamoid, and he took us on a Chalamoid trip. We all went in by ourselves, and they're like, you need an adult. So we were a bunch of Hasidic kids going to get Lance to be our adult. And I remember they were like, who is this guy to you? I remember the looks we would get with a bunch of Hasidic kids, and we liked him, he would carry on us. Like, we were comfortable with him. So that was like, yeah, that's a memory that I remember people looking at us like, this is weird.
That's cute. Did you feel in early childhood like you were restricted?
Early childhood, not at all. I think because we're a house of girls, it felt very different and I didn't feel restricted. When I became a teenager, that was more in school, I started to feel it a lot more. There were specific rules that I was like questioning. But as a young girl, like I was pretty happy. I think it was just fun. It was a bunch of girls. Like, how fun is that? It was loud.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always had friends, like it felt fun. It didn't feel problematic or like I was struggling until I was older.
Now, as an adult, when you look back, can you see in your childhood a foreshadowing of the fact that you ended up on a different path than your parents expected you to take?
So I was always curious and I would always question everything. And when I was a kid, it was adorable. I was smart and funny and curious, and who doesn't, and I also spoke English as a very young kid because I thought I was fancy and had grown up. And then when I got a little older, it wasn't so cute anymore, being sensitive and curious and questioning. It started to become a little, so that's when like the teachers would say not to ask those questions in public. It started to become like we want to control the questions and shut up a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's a very good question. I don't know. I wonder about that. I actually struggle with it a little. I talk about it in the therapy. Why me out of all? And my sisters are brilliant and they're passionate and they're curious. I don't know. I don't know why my journey is different than theirs. I not super clear about it. No.
Yeah, I love that answer, I have to say, because I happen to ask myself the same question. I have 14 siblings,
Yeah.
and they are, in the secular world, they like the narrative of you were the one
Yes.
who had more personality or something than them, but that's not true at all. My siblings are enormous, enormous characters, very bright, very interesting people. And I think for me, I think there are a number of things that, like, life happened.
Yeah.
It's like luck combined with personality that
Yeah.
led me on a different path. But there are little events in my childhood that I can look back and say, well, like you said, I was definitely like something like wanting to speak English when you're supposed to speak Yiddish. That's like a little tell. You have a little hunger that's larger.
Yeah. I like a curiosity of the world that I think that the thing is I didn't, other kids are curious. And then at a certain age, they the teachers are like, okay, this is not what we talk about anymore, or the parents are like, there's a message that you get of, okay, we're not gonna talk about these things anymore, we're just gonna do what we're supposed to be doing. For some reason I couldn't shut it up. I kept asking the questions and I kept voicing, even if I got responses in school that it wasn't, they would question why I'm questioning. It didn't shut me up, and for some reason I had that hunger always. And at home it was understood more, much more. But in school, I would get into trouble because I was asking those questions, my friends were told not to be friends with me because I was confused, because I was asking questions. So that's where it's clearer to me how I ended up making different choices than my siblings. My mother always, there's a joke in my family that I was born late, because I'm always late, but also I would walk behind everybody. So I think I was very curious about how the world worked outside also of my community. I was just curious about things that maybe other people weren't. And so that led me to want to know more about the world. And I did. I found my neighbor, which was a little different. I remember I was in summer school, so we were wearing beige tights in high school. I think it was ninth grade. It was the beginning of ninth grade. I was wearing beige tights, so you had to wear seams. And my friend, she had a party, and I wore blue tights to her party because she was Chabad. And I remember my mom seeing this and my mom saying, oh, I get it. You wanted to be like them. And that was like it's like a little tell of like, I'm going to make a different choice. So I had that curiosity, I think, and that intrigue to try to explore what is life? How are other people living?
It's interesting that your parents were they not very critical of you for instance, wearing blue tights to your Chabad friend? Because these are little tells that parents know are big red flags in terms of the child staying on the derech, on the path.
I think I definitely had, like, my mom and I butted heads as a teenager for a lot of things. She was seeing stuff that was hard for her. But this was one of those stories I think that she really tried. There were ways that she really tried to be like, okay, I understand. And maybe also that it didn't feel like such a big threat. It wasn't like I'm wearing blue tights everywhere. It was to my friend's house. I think in her head it was categorized. She did tell me recently, like this past summer, she said it was really hard to see that you were doing things differently. And I even thought about moving. She said, not that they weren't from, they were
Wow.
like really nice people, but I could see that you were becoming different. And yeah, so she was concerned about it. Yeah.
Interesting. Did God play an important role, like Hashem, faith in your childhood?
Yeah, I very much believe, I very, very, very much believed in God. And I also believed like I had a personal relationship. I remember when I was getting into trouble for asking questions, I would say, in my head, I would think, why would Hashem put those questions in my mind? That means it's okay. Like I somehow knew that they were wrong for telling me not to ask questions because Hashem wouldn't have put those questions in my mind. It still got in, the doubt still got in and the self-judgment got in. But like in my head, the way that I fought those narratives and continued to ask questions is I really believe that Hashem was on my side. He knows what I'm thinking and I'm not coming from a bad place and my intentions are pure and I'm just curious. I want to know more. And I went to summer school, so we didn't learn inside any text, right? We would get a photocopy of what they wanted us to know from that week's parsha or from that halacha, and I would always ask what came before, what was the context. I always needed to know more. And then we had 18-year-old teachers or 19, they didn't know, you know? But some of them, it became this little power struggle. And I would go home and learn in English by myself and then come back and be like, but Rashi said this and the Rambam said this and this person said this. And I remember them saying, who do you think you are? You're not like Rashi. And I was like, why? Why could they ask? Why can't I ask? There was something about me. So I think my connection to God was very much my connection to like, I wanted to know more of what I was learning. I wasn't doing Goyish things. I wanted Jewish things, but I wanted to know more. So it was a complicated thing for them. And I think at least in my family, they didn't push back on that because my father appreciated that I wanted to know more. So it made it a little harder to figure out how to deal with me, I think.
I have to tell you, just hearing you talk brings back so many memories. I think of anyone whose story I've heard, I relate to this the most. I also felt like I'm in the right,
Mm,
and therefore, not in everything, but in many things, I had a feeling like God would appreciate what I'm asking. It's coming from a good place,
yeah,
and you are wrong
yeah,
in criticizing me. And I really get that. And also the walking behind everyone. To this day, I like to sit in restaurants in the corner, Then you can see everything.
yeah. So maybe that's that through line. I'm curious if that's like everybody, like not everybody, because
Yeah.
people leave for different reasons, but like,
Like that's other people.
yeah, to just like want to witness the world.
And I think the world we come from is very much a world where you have to be in it. And if you like to
Yes.
be the fly on the wall, then that is, I think, sometimes creates issues with fitting in.
Yeah.
I have a question. Was there anything that happened in your childhood in general that you would say was particularly challenging or painful outside of what we had talked about?
I think the big the big thing I think was the teacher telling my friends not to be friends with me and finding out that's like a wound, right? And like finding out about it. And there was one particular teacher that she would tell me, your questions are great questions. Come to me after class. Some of the girls can't handle it. So I opened up to her, not personal stuff, but like she knew how my mind worked because I was asking the questions. I would come to her after class with a bunch of questions. And then she told people not to be friends with me. And it was a real
Oh,
betrayal. And I remember when I got married, my mother invited her because she thought I had liked her. Because my experience, she didn't know the updated version that she had done that. That was a very big pain point. That thinking I can trust
yeah.
her, and then she told people I was not a good influence. As a teenager, that was really, really hard. Really, really hard. I think, like you mentioned, there's certain stuff that happen in life that guides you in certain ways. My father actually says that I didn't leave. My father says you were pushed out. And he said that you were told that you weren't the way that you were thinking was wrong, and it wasn't. And those teachers that didn't understand how to navigate that. Like you said, I thought I'm right, they're wrong. So clearly the system is off. You know, like clearly something I can't deal with this system, and this is not my place. As I get older, I understand the context so much more, and it's I see it differently. But as a kid, it felt very bad to be bad when I didn't mean to be bad. I was like, I wasn't doing things that were trouble, but I was considered problematic, and that was hard. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very painful. Did you generally have friends outside of becoming like the bad apple?
Yeah, because even that didn't work, right? Like the teacher tried. Yeah, my sister said this recently, which is, she said, if anybody asks why you left, it's not because you weren't popular. You had tons of friends. So I did always have friends. I didn't always feel super close with the people that were the friends, right? Like I had my neighbor, and I had some friends who really knew what I was going through. I also had some anxiety and like OCD at that age, because there was ways that it manifested, this feeling like I can't control things manifested in my life. And I had like two friends that I was very close with. I had a cousin that I was very close with.
I think for a lot of people who hear our stories of coming from the Hasidic community, they don't realize that growing up a woman in this world is being a very social creature, and our place in the female hierarchy. Do we have friends can be so important. So when a teacher pulls aside your friends and says, don't be friends with Malki because she's a bad influence, the degree to which that creates a wound is like, it's such a betrayal, because your entire world is defined by these friendships.
Yeah. Thankfully, it didn't work, right? And this wasn't my general friends. This was like close friends, the ones that I did open up to, the ones that knew that I was struggling, and they knew me, so it didn't work. I felt held in that, not like everyone was against me. It was the teacher was wrong. But yeah, it's such a social, my mom always wanted me to have more friends. I'm more the kind of person that I had one very close friend, two very close friends, like one-on-one relationships. And then I was part of bigger groups, but they weren't my close friends. But my mom was used to big groups of friends. She grew up in Williamsburg and had tons of friends. And she would always tell me, you need to make more and more friends. It was it's an interesting thing, because I hadn't really thought about it, but it is true that growing up as a woman in this world it's so social. Everything is with your friends. I mean, it's Shabbos, even when you're supposed to be home, is with your friends. After school is with your friends.
We got one question that I want to ask you before I move on to something else. Stage is asking for an example of things you might have questioned. Does anything come to you?
Yeah. I questioned, how do we know that Judaism is the right religion? Because there are other people living different religions and follow them really strongly and believe that that's the right way. How do we know that ours is right? And it wasn't coming from like a deep, I didn't know enough. I wasn't learning comparative religion, but it was, there's other people in the world. Why do we do this? Ultimately, actually, my dad answered this question he said, we don't really know. We all get wisdom. Like, this is what my grandfather did. This is the way that we understand life and the lens that we see the world through. And this is what we kind of inherited. Because I've had that conversation, But yeah, that was a big one. Another one was, why do men go to the mikveh? Why don't women go every day to the mikveh? And that became this like that question, because I don't know how much of your audience knows, but like women go to the mikveh based on the menstrual cycle, but men go every morning. Hasidic men often go every morning. And I was like, wait, why don't women go? So those were questions that triggered things.
I see.
Yeah.
It touched the nerve.
It touched the nerve.
Interesting. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, anything that's related to reproduction and sex.
Yes.
You're not, you can be potentially messing with the wrong thing if you're asking about it. Obviously, the question of why men go to the mikveh is such a banal question, but to those who know the secrets of the mikveh, it's
right. And I was so innocent. I was just like, I don't mean anything bad. Like, I'm just literally asking about every single day go to the mikveh. That's got nothing to do with the secrets.
Yeah. Yeah. What happened after you left school? Did you get married?
I actually left school for 12th grade. I went to seminary in England. I went for 2 years to a not Hasidic.
Manchester?
Yeah, the new Manchester, which isn't Hasidic. And so I actually got a tutor to learn inside and to learn Aramaic a little and like Rashi and stuff. And So that was already me being different. And then I actually wore blue tights or socks. I became a little bit more modern. It was more my style changed. The kinds of stuff that I would wear, maybe my tops were a little more fitted, and my colors, I wore more colors that my mom just thought weren't classy. They weren't Hasidic. They weren't Heimish. They weren't Hungarian looking. They didn't look fancy, and which these days is more common in the Hasidic world, to wear more comfortable clothing and t-shirts. They don't, like my siblings and my nieces wear more casual stuff. But when I was growing up, that wasn't happening. And so my mother really hated that. So things like that. And I had my freedom because I was in England, and I would go shopping with my friends, and I met people from different places in the world. And I did ask a bunch of questions, and we had like a Seder, we had night Seder, we had a chavrusa. And then in the end, I had a rabbi tell me that it's a shame you weren't born a boy, because as a woman, it's not necessary, like the way that I'm thinking. So he's the first person that told me on the nose that, and it was actually kind of a relief, because I'm not a boy. That's not my story. But I knew that I was asking questions that were good questions, and that it's just, there was no space for it. And I was looking for a place for it. That's why I went to seminary. Like, I was learning. I wanted to learn. And in the end, I started to learn with this rabbi basically for like a month straight before he told me this. And it was sad, but also a relief.
Yeah. Did you get engaged? You came back after seminary and you got engaged?
Yeah, I came back after seminary. I was there for 12th grade and for seminary, so for 2 years. And then I was very strong about not wanting to get married till I was 25, but it didn't work out. And I remember when my mother, they told me about this boy, and he was from Babiv, and a little different. They were like they worked really, really hard, because even with Babiv, like Babiv boy is different than a Satmar boy or a Pupa or Vizhnitz.
Yeah.
It's still different. Not so much girls, but the boy. But they worked really hard to try to find someone that was a little bit more worldly, and he asked questions, and they worked really hard.
How old were you?
19.
Not quite 25.
Not even close. I know. And I needed to meet the parents first, because I didn't want to do it super Hasidic. And I said, no, that's not the right boy for me if I need to meet his parents before I meet him. They told me a story that he met a different girl before, and they thought they were getting engaged, and then the parents really objected to it. So it was just like, and so I didn't want to do the story of, going to like Pathmark or ShopRite and standing on the aisle. That's, my sisters have done it.
It happened to me.
It happened to you. Did you have to go to like
in Walmart? Yeah.
One end of the aisle and then they pass?
Exactly what happened to me.
So what happened to my sister?
My future mother-in-law passed. She went like behind me and checked me out, and then called the matchmaker. And it was her mistake to have said that she's okay with the next step, but that happened to me.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I didn't want to do that. So they owned a store in Boro Park, and I said, I'm going to walk in. I tried to do my own thing, I walked into the store and I said, hi, I'm Malki. So I didn't want to do, and then I met his mom, and his father came out, and then his father said hi, and then his father left. But I found out that they had the glass, like he was behind the glass that I couldn't see him, but he could see me. So they were both watching me. And then they said yes for the next step. And, I got really lucky, actually. He was a really good man, really, really good man. In the end, like, our lives weren't going in the same direction, but I appreciate that my parents tried so hard.
How many dates did you have with him?
So that's another thing. I thought I was going on dates, because I was like, I'm not doing the Hasidic system. But it was 3, and we got engaged. Everything I thought I'm doing on my own was really very much, I was sheltered. And then he said, okay, do you want to take the next step, or do you want to take this further?
Can I ask if you were attracted to him?
Frida, what kind of question? What are you asking? How do I know? What are you asking? I don't know. Sorry.
I don't know.
How would I know?
I'm curious.
Like, attraction wasn't a thought, right? Like, I don't know. It's a very confusing thing. I think about this with my sexuality. It's a very confusing thing, because we don't meet people based on attraction. We meet people based on value systems and what your future looks like, which honestly, right now at my stage in life, I get there's wisdom. There's wisdom. I get it. But I didn't think about if I'm attracted to him. I felt seen by him. I felt like he understood this part of me. He appreciated how I was thinking, and he was a little different too. It felt like, oh, this is a person that I'm not going to have to fold myself into something to be with. So that's what felt good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. I get it very much.
Did you know what you were attracted to? Who you were attracted to?
My own memory of my engagement was so defined by the fact that my to-be groom wore schwarze Gläser, and I was so concerned by that because it was like, oh, that's
Like the Schwarze laser, like
the plastic
the
frames
plastic,
that
yeah.
looks almost rubbish. It looked very conservative, and I was so consumed with a worry that he would be too conservative that I don't think attraction was something that was on my mind.
Yes. Right? You look at those very, very different things of what it means, what kind of life you're going to have together.
Yeah, and also for those of us who crave freedom, marriage is the vehicle for freedom, and that's what we're evaluating.
Yes.
Am I going to get the freedom with this man, or is he going to be the kind of man who's like my husband doesn't let?
Yes. Which that was never something that I would ever be okay with, and I think my family knew that. And that's not really something that I think because we grew up with a bunch of girls, that wasn't a thing in my house that it would be that. But you are changed by the partner that you're with, and we still have the system of you do what your husband, like halachically and based on the sect he's from, you do what your husband kind of family does. And those were the things that felt like, okay, if they're going to be a bit more from, what does that mean? How does that look like in my life? He seemed open-minded. He was open-minded, more than me actually. Like he was a little bit more aufgeklärt and than I was. He got me my first cell phone.
Wow.
And there was like, yeah, like he was more aufgeklärt than I was. Again, quite nerdy, not like a cool boy, but like that's what my family was trying to do, because I think a lot of people, because I was a little different, I was read like modern Satmar boys, and my family was like, that's not Malki, that's not who she is. So he wasn't that, but he knew about the world, and it felt like, oh, he's gonna actually teach me more about the world, and we get to experience the world together. And we did. I watched my first movie.
Oh, really? Which one?
Okay, so I didn't tell you this part. Before we met his parents, my friend was married, and she was my friend from Seminary, so she didn't grow up Hasidic, a little bit more modern than I was, very from. But she had a TV in her house, or a DVD player. We went to Blockbuster, or one of those stores at the time, and we got a movie. We got Meet the Parents, because I was meeting the parents. And it wasn't at all like that, but that was one of my first movies. And then when I was married, that was my movie. And when I was married, we watched The Dreamers. Do you know The Dreamers? It's a pretty, like, I was just like, oh, movies are dirty. It's a incestual Frenchish film, I was like, oh, movies really are dirty.
I see.
But I watched that with my husband. He knew movies a lot more than I did. And yeah. But I was, when we got married, my sisters were really embarrassed, because by the mitzvahs, when we held hands, we were smiling at each other, and none of us were looking down and davening. We looked like we were in love, and they were like, that was super uncomfortable. So we didn't do it the right way, apparently. Yeah. So yeah, I think I was excited.
You were excited.
Yeah, it's such an important thing to think of, that, like, that's freedom, and you get to live the life you want, and it felt very exciting.
How did you learn about sex? Did you have a college teacher the traditional way, or you already knew?
I knew, and I had a college teacher. I went to a more modern college teacher who talked about female pleasure, mitzvahs aina, and a lot of focus was on that. Yeah, it was a lot about agency. It was a more modern. Again, my family really, really tried, and I really tried, and they tried to guide me in a way that would work for my brain. So she was like a fancy Hasidic woman, but didn't come from Satmar, like a very Boro Park, Heimish woman. But you know what I did, Frida? Which is a sign that I was a little different. I needed to discuss what was actually going to happen, and I was like, I can't. The wedding night is not happening. That seems like ritual, maybe rape or problematic. So I called his chusin teacher. I had a call. I really was like, so that's not what's going to happen. It's going to be us, like, we're going to do it our own way. We have to get to know each other. It's going to take a few days to get to know each other. I was very much like, again, I tried within the system to figure out how to do it. So that was an interesting story because this Chusin teacher ended up being a little problematic. We found out, like, I felt it was off, and then we found out later there were some stories about him. But yeah, I tried to do it my own way.
How long were you married for?
For 4 years.
4 years?
Yeah.
No children?
No, so that was another thing. I did stick to that I wasn't going to have kids till I was 20. Like, it moved, right? I was like, I'm not getting married till 25. And then it was like, no kids till 25. So yeah, no kids. And my family knew, and he, of course, knew. But his family kept saying, like, it's okay. We also took our time having, like, it took us a little few years. It's fine. And I would tell him, tell your mom. Like, it's that we're not trying. Like, she's concerned. She was concerned. So that was a thing. It was better if she was concerned than telling her. And that was ultimately one of the big factors of why we ended it at that point, is because I still couldn't see that in that community, having kids. So that was one of the big differences we were struggling with.
Was the end of the marriage difficult for you emotionally after 4 years? That's a long marriage.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. It was my decision. He loved me so much that whatever I wanted, he would do. So we immediately got a get, even though he preferred to stay together, but he didn't want to hold anything over me. Again, I got really lucky. He's a really good person, and he loved me. That we would cry on the couch a lot together, like hold each other and be like, we don't know how to make this work. And he would say we would move out of the community, and it just didn't happen. And the truth, I look at it now, again, I was so naive and idealistic, and I thought the answers were outside. And the answers are not outside. Like, I'm living in the secular world. Happiness does not come from outside. But, like, I didn't know any of that. I didn't, like, I was young and I was idealistic and saw things quite black and white. And I was like, I can't make it work here. And my friends were all having kids, and somehow everyone was able to make it work. And I felt like I couldn't fit into this box. And he never really asked me to fit into the box. But for me, that was super hard. And our get story is also, like, insane. We got separated, and he called them before to let them know that they need to be sensitive to me. So I didn't come with a shaitel, and I did it. They played bad cop, good cop. One of them spoke to me in English. Both of them spoke to me in English as if I had forgotten Yiddish, And they were like, one of them was like, women feel like they have to do everything, and like feminism they talked about. And the other one said, no, it's okay. They should be able to do whatever they want to do. And they were having these conversations, and we were crying. The two of us were crying. And they said, are you sure you want to end this? And we said, yeah, but they could see that there was love. And they kept questioning, maybe we should go to therapy, maybe. And I said, no. And then as they went and wrote up, the two of us were kissing, and they saw. It was really confusing, and we were crying, and he was holding me, and I was sitting on his lap, and like we were kissing at the base there. Like, it was a really weird, really, really weird. And then they were like, are you sure you want to do this? This doesn't seem. And we said yes. And then after, when we're supposed to get the get, you're not supposed to touch, right? So you have to like drop it in the hand. There's a whole like skit. It felt like a skit. We were giggling like kids. And we finished that, and we went out for lunch together to celebrate. And then we kissed. It's heartbreaking because it was so much love. I needed it to happen then, but it was painful. And then even after we separated, we kind of got back together. I don't remember if it was before the get or after the get. But we separated a few times. I couldn't be religious for him or for somebody else. And
I'm so touched hearing this, because I think some people live very clean, very tidy lives, and some people have to explore. And you're very young, and you really sometimes have to know yourself, or you can't lie to someone and be religious for them. Some people can, and I have no judgment of them. But if you can't, then you can't, and then that there's all of this young, intense emotion. It's so painful and beautiful, of course. Can you talk about what happened after you got divorced, where your life went from there?
yeah, after I got divorced, I think I just tried to experience the world in different ways. I feel like I learned things very fast. It's a little like I was a teenager, but trying to catch up, but I looked like a grown-up. So like social dynamics that were very different culturally, dating, work stuff, things that you kind of tried to figure out on my own. again, I come from like a really good family, so I did have them, but I felt like I needed to take a big break from them to be able to be my own person. So I put a lot of space at the beginning, more so my choice, to be able to like figure out who I wanted to be and who I was without hurting them. I felt like if I was close enough, I would see that I was causing them pain and I wouldn't be able to do my own thing. And I was also putting myself through school. So I was in college and working and in college and having these different social experiences until I found acting, and which actually kind of found me. And then it felt like my path was more focused on, oh, this is something I'm going to explore. This is the industry I'm going to explore. One of the things that I think I think we are lucky, is that as adults, we got to experience new things that, and I think I still like to live in the world that I feel like I'm experiencing new things. Oh, I never tasted this before. Oh, I wouldn't have, like if I was, I get to have this experience now. And there was a lot of these new experiences. So yeah, once I found film though, it gave me a little bit more focus on who I was and felt more like I can settle down. I studied acting and then, got into all the other angles of film, like producing and writing. I studied psychology also, which I really enjoyed. But like figure out who are your people, what kind of films that that you bond over, the cultural touchstones that I didn't have because I come from a different world, and to also it took time to see that as a strength, to see where I come from actually as part of why I am the way I am. It's not despite it. And so I was raised to see nuance. And, with being Hasidic, you do look at different, like, you find little ways that you make things work.
Also, I get a lot of questions from people who contact me and say, how do you build community after going through such a rupture of leaving your community? And I get this question from people who are from people who are, let's say, divorced or are going through a major move or from or not from, whatever it is, for some reason, they need to find a new community and they really, really struggle with it. And I think your acting is an example of finding community. I think for a lot of people, this is a very, very important part of rebirth, so to speak, after you go through such a rupture, if you leave the community that you were raised in, if it's so tight knit.
Yeah, because like you said, there's so much social thing is a big part, and you kind of lose that. Again, I think that's another. Did you find that you had to lose your social? Did you lose your social standing, or did you leave it?
I like what your father said about being pushed out instead of leaving. I think the story of saying I left gives us agency and it makes us feel good about our journeys. But I would definitely say I was pushed out. And of course, when you're pushed out, you you leave. When you have to kind of be that caterpillar that turns into a butterfly, I think it makes it really hard to hold on to these relationships where people want to see the caterpillar. They're like, what's happening? You're changing, you're changing, don't change. And you often feel like you have to pull away so they can let you go through your process.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because one of the things I think my mother and what would bring her comfort is every time I would talk to her, she said, "Oh, you sound the same. You sound like my Malky." And I said, "Mommy, I am your Malky." Like nothing, I think that there was so much fear that she didn't know the world I was in, and they want to keep you safe. And she doesn't understand my world. She doesn't know how to keep me safe. She doesn't know how to give me advice. Like there was a lot that felt so different. So her fear of losing me, fear of I will be a butterfly, like that will fly away and I'm done is and I think that for a few years I thought I also had to. I thought I had to shed it fully. And I didn't realize that my spine is still the caterpillar. Like the spine of the butterfly is the same, right? It's still and I was like, my roots are still that. I am still you. There's values and they're like I'm still the person that I was raised to be. That's what I realized, that rupture was actually really, I was ripping parts of me off that I don't want to do anymore. Part of that was noticing I ran into a cousin this year or last year. And she said, when you left, I lost my best friend. This was a cousin that I was so close with. And it was sad for a moment to think, and I've been thinking about this also with my younger sister. We were so close. And when I left, it was my protective thing to like needed to put space between us. And I hadn't thought about what it feels like to be them, because they didn't judge me. They loved me. They would have been accepting, but I needed the space. And I didn't think about there was a rupture between, like, I also cut that.
Thank you for that. We're both in our 40s, and that makes us like the the original generation that really started to leave. It's incredible because we were the kids 5 minutes ago, but now we're now the we're the elders. We're the elders. It's incredible, especially because it's such a young population. Everyone is so young. There's so many young people that I find myself often talking about things that most people who, for instance, watch my videos have no idea about because they weren't born yet. But what I really, really feel is important about our journeys, which I think are in many ways a lot harder than the journeys of those that the people who are going through the caterpillar to the butterfly transformation today. There was no roadmap for the people around us or for us. And it was just parents who were panicking, who were reacting in all sorts of like rogue ways
Rogue, yeah.
Yeah,
It's a good word for it. Yeah.
whatever they were trying to figure out. And for us, the message was very clear. You're out. You're out. You're shiksa. It's over. It's over. There's no place. And I remember actually going to Footsteps early in my journey and lighting candles on Friday night, and someone asking me, like it was a spectacle, someone asking me, why are you doing it? There was such a strong sense that we carried based on the message we were given that we cannot go through any messy personal transformation and take along our identity and our religion and our place, which was so unfair, I feel. And I think this is why our stories today are not just stories, oh, another person who's left, but rather are so important because for both the people who need to go through a life journey and those who watch a family member going through a life journey, it allows like to hear what we went through and to make more space than we had.
Yeah. One of the things that gives me hope is I've met people. So my dad works for an organization called ITSA, and he actually helps people with transition. He helps families. So like parents to not personalize when their kids leave, to like figure out ways to not cut connection. There's organizations these days that, that my father does, but also parents supporting other parents that have kids that had left, because it is something that they don't understand. It's a world that they're not familiar with, they're concerned about. I mean, my sister thought that I would die of AIDS. That's, she thought that that would be because if I'm dating outside of marriage and outside of the community, she would get a call one day that I was dead in a hotel room. My life didn't look anything like that. I never did drugs and I didn't be in a hotel room, nothing. But to her, in her mind, it felt so scary and so foreign, which is why I think my mother felt so relieved every time she would hear me and it'd be like, "Oh, you're my Malky." And I think these days there's all these organizations and support groups, like these people that I'm meeting that know my dad. I'm meeting them at Shabbos meals, right? I'm meeting them and they're doing their own thing. They didn't leave it all behind. And some of them are choosing to get married to someone at a young age, to someone else from that kind of world, because they're wanting both of those worlds. Like it's there's room for it where there wasn't when we
Yeah.
were growing up. And if you want to light candles, and that's a beautiful thing. And to be honest, I judged people too that had left and were still doing some things. I was going through my own, but I was also, I don't know if judged, but I questioned. Like I remember friends were going to Shiel and Yom Kippur, and I was like, but why? But what is that? Again, going back to the question, who knows if this is the right religion? And it's not about religion. I think we're all just humans trying to have meaningful
Yeah.
experiences in life, and this is what we know. And so if I say Shema at night, it brings me comfort, it makes me feel connected to something bigger. I think we all try in our own ways to, like, there is wisdom, I think, in people that have lived life before us.
So Debbie asked, question, is it easier staying in the community today than it was 20 years ago?
That's it's a really good question. I think it's easier means that, like, there's a bit more leeway. Yes, people also move out of town. There's also like different neighborhoods. There's schools that are more like a little bit more modern, so the kids could go to, but still Hasidic gestimmt. Like, but yeah, I would say probably. I'm not. I wonder what I would feel like if I was then. If I'm like 20 trying to figure it out. But from the people that I meet now,
there's definitely, it seems to be, you don't need to make that break in the same way. For me, I needed to make a break and then figure out how to reconnect. And I feel these days you don't necessarily need to make such a big break.
Yeah, yeah. This is such a big subject. I want to move on to a bit of an interesting question from Josh Berman. With respect, when it starts with respect, we can already be nervous. I ask, why leave Yiddishkeit? Understand the need for change totally. Why not enjoy it your way? I get this question almost every day. Like, why did you have to stop being from? Why can't you just be a little more modern?
I didn't leave Yiddishkeit. I am Jewish, and my relationship to something greater is my own. And I think that that's what I find so beautiful. I think for me, like Yiddishkeit, and it's a way to live. Like I was saying, I appreciate the wisdom in that. There is wisdom, and it can help you live life. And I find ways that it helps me in my own way. Um, so yeah, again, I think my story isn't so much of leaving. It's not leaving something for another. It's leaving to find me and parts of me, and then I connect to what feels okay for me. I think religion is very personal.
To me, another factor of Hasidishkeit, less spiritual, is the very family-oriented
Yes.
world. How do you feel about that? Can I ask about your life, like
Yeah.
where you're at? You don't have
And
kids. You never had kids.
I don't have kids, and I actually, I think that I probably would be much more pushed to have kids, or like feel like I needed to have kids, if I didn't come from a family with a bunch of kids. I love that Boro Park exists. I love that my family keeps having more babies. I would be so sad if that wasn't the case. And it gives me a sense of connection to they are my family, and I go see, like if I don't see my family for a few weeks, I get homesick. I want to see them. Yeah, there's so much I think about being Hasidic, and like I said, I also really love Yiddish. And then these days, I know this is like questionable, but like for some people, but Hasidic garb for me is huge. Men's garb, and I'm a woman, so it could be a little confusing. My family though is really, they think it's funny, but they're supportive, which is great. Like my father gave me a Beckett. Like how amazing is that? My mother had found out that my nephews had given me Tish Becketches, and she thought it was for a play, because sometimes I'll collect like head coverings, wigs, whatever for shows. And I was like, no, mommy, I just really like that. And then she told my father Malky wants a Beckett, because I said, I better really want a heavier one. It's like Malky wants a Beckett. So he went to his closet and took out one and said, this one is very heavy for me. Do you want it? And my mother was adjusting it on me and said, like, this, it was really touching. And it was really special. Like it's I have to explain to my mother, it's not a men's garb, it's a Hasidic men's garb. Like it's not like I'm wearing, it's like it's a coat. You would wear a coat, like nobody on
It
the
looks like a
street.
trench coat.
Exactly. So I did have to, because there is a thing about wearing men's clothes that my mom is not so comfortable with. But once she got past that, it's really loving, and it's not, nobody talks about it on the nose. But there's that, my grandparents, when my grandfather died, I got the kuchma. Out of everybody, and I wear it, and my family just accepts that. It connects me to my family, to the fact that, and to my heritage, to my grandparents.
My grandmother just passed away at 102, and
Wow.
she lived for the longest time. She lived in the same place where she had this enormous digital clock. And I don't know, I don't remember. I think my son was young, but I really wanted the clock. I felt like it would be perfect for my son. So I always would ask about it. And when I came to Shiva, my cousin said, Friday, the clock is yours. And I never thought I would get anything. Like it didn't even occur to me. And just thinking of that kuchma, when I think about how I
Yeah.
felt when I heard I'm getting the clock, which my son has even grown. Like when I wanted it originally, it was really for my son, but it was such a special, special moment. Like I felt
Yeah.
so touched.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Well, actually, on that note, I think this is the end of our time. So do you want to wrap up and just share what you want to, like, what your hope is in your work in the future as an actress, that you hope you can, what you aim to do through your work in terms of
Yeah,
public education?
I think so. So nuance representation is really, really important. And one of the things I have a file on and this is for some project that I'm working on, but I have a file on my computer, which is men holding babies. Men are involved in family life, and we never see that in shows. And that's like a big part for me. It's like I want to show that it's, yes, a lot of the work falls there's a thing on the mother, but because there's a system, it's a machine that works. He goes out and
Yeah.
makes money. But when you see families together, men are holding how do you think she's holding 5 babies? You know what I mean? Like, you see men with carriages and strollers and really involved in child rearing, and I want to show that. I think that's really, really important. Also, people have an idea of like, look how women are dressed and look how the men are dressed. Are they comfortable? Like, this is not a sexism thing in the same way as we look at
Yeah.
it through the secular lens. It comes from a different place. There's rules for both, and there is gender divides and all this stuff, but it's not from a secular. It's not. You can't go. You can't look at it through a secular lens and be like, oh, the woman is oppressed and she's covered. Look at the men; they're also covered. Like you're coming from a different lens. And I think just showing that, just showing just the nuance, and without looking at it through the secular world, without looking at it, the secular world as the nucleus and everything is around it. What my goal is in TV shows and stuff is to show what that world does have, not only what it doesn't have. What is the media that they consume? What is that social life, like you were saying, that is a beautiful thing? What is like all these organizations that support people in their world? Why do people leave? And why, when I leave, do I miss parts of it, or do I want to be parts of it, a part of it in some way? If it's so clearly bad, which is often portrayed that you have to escape it, you're not getting the full story. You're not getting the richness. So my goal is to just show the humanity, the richness, and the full story is so much more interesting. It's so much. Isn't it more interesting, my guess, than the story of running away from your husband? Like, right? And visually, that much more, that makes for a beautiful film, much more than someone that's meek and that also reflects more of human life. Human life is not so black and white, and it's not so clean, and people aren't messy. You earlier said that some people aren't messy. I don't know any of those people whose lives is not messy, whose lives is exactly
That's
what they set out
true.
to be forever. You might have a few years of that. Nobody's life is that. So that's kind of that's my goal. And I would like for stories that are told on the big stages in theater and in TV and in movies to elevate their understanding of culturally appropriate and respectable portrayals, like to demand more and to expect more and to do better. And so that's where I'm at. That's what I'm trying to.
It's very hard because they're the people who usually have the opportunity to create and to tell stories and to fund the telling of stories often don't understand what we intuitively understand and what you just so eloquently said. And I wish you luck because I stand behind this project. I stand behind telling human stories. I think, especially in the climate we're at now, there's so much division, storytelling, which I see as being, speaking of Hasidic things, being one of the root things of my own Hasidic inheritance is the art of storytelling. And I think storytelling that
Yeah.
gets us closer to each other is so beautiful and so important.
Yeah, it's a lot of conversations, a lot of pushback, a lot of calls, and a lot of tears, and it's important, so I keep doing it.
We should put a pin in this conversation and check back in 5 years, and hopefully
Yes,
things will have changed
hopefully,
because this
right.
has got to change.
I think
This
yes,
is
it has to change. Yes.
It
So
has to
that's, yeah,
change.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I love talking to you. We went over our time, but that's totally fine.
Thank you for
Um,
doing this, and I'm so sorry. I mean, my computer was actually charging. I don't know, but I'm sorry. I'm
it's
sorry to
fine. It's
everybody with the
fine. It all
technical
worked out.
difficulties.
Yeah.
It's a
It all
pain, but
worked out.
yeah, good.
Let's just I'm gonna put your website and your Instagram
Okay.
out there. It's melissaweiss.com is your website, right?
Yeah, and then Instagram is Melissa Weisz.
Okay, great. It's already in the video description, but I'll just share it again. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who was here for the live stream and those of you who couldn't make it and are watching this later. I'm so glad that you're watching. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Check out Melissa's work. Leave your questions in the comments. Just interesting to hear your feedback and wishing you all the best. Thanks, Melissa.